Hello, everyone, and welcome to Resistance Live for the 30th of May, 2024, aka day 2 of Verdict Watch. I'm glad you're all here. We've had some developments with the jury since yesterday, fairly significant ones, honestly. We're going to talk through all of that, as well as the absolutely outrageous letter from Justice Alito that landed in the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. But first things first, I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva territory. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a navy blue silk blouse. My hair is pulled back. I have my thick gold hoop earrings in, and I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I am in front of my plant, my lamp, and my chair in my office, as always. Welcome. Okay, so yesterday afternoon, we had that moment that is very anxiogenic, frankly, if you're in court, which is where the bell rings to notify the courtroom that the jury has something for the judge. This will be the same bell that they will ring, by the way, if they have a verdict, and nobody really knows what it is until the note gets to the judge, okay? Yesterday, there were 2 notes from the jury. One first, which asked for a readback of 4 different pieces of testimony, and a second that asked for a readback of the jury instructions. Now, I'm going to remind you all of something about all of this, okay? Because there are a lot of people running around very doom and gloom about this, that, somehow this means that there's something wrong with this jury, or that the jury is hung, or that there's, some kind of issue. I just have to point out that these bells got rung after 3.5 hours of deliberation, which in and of itself is a very short period of time in a case with 34 felonies, all right? The request to have the jury instructions read back actually did not surprise me. I'm going to remind you all that the way that the jury instructions were read yesterday morning came on the heels of a very late night in court, okay? Again, the closing arguments went all the way until 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night. And I wouldn't be surprised if the jury was a little bit tired yesterday morning when the jury instructions were read for the first time. And there were obviously parts related to how evidence is supposed to be interpreted that remained an open issue for whatever reason for the jury. So they did the right thing here. Now, I want to say one thing, because there are a lot of people, again, running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Like, why don't they have a copy of the jury instructions? Well, under New York law, you're not allowed to have a copy of the jury instructions given to the jury over the defendant's objection, all right? And there's actually controlling case law that says if you give the jury instructions in New York without the defendant's consent and waiver, you are in a situation where there could be a reversible issue on appeal. So the fact that they don't have the jury instructions is yet another means by which Judge Merchan is making sure that the verdict will be preserved in the event that it is guilty and Trump appeals, which of course he will. So one of the things that folks should just be very, very thoughtful about here is that the jury is doing the right thing by asking to have those instructions read back. If they have a question about what was said in those jury instructions, asking the judge to read it back is the right thing to do. And it's actually a sign of diligence on the part of the jury to make sure they're doing everything right. I don't read anything negative into this. I don't think anybody here should read anything negative into this. And personally, I think it's the right way to go, right? Like, it's what they should be doing if there is a question. If one juror has notes that say the jury instruction said one thing and another juror remembers it differently, the way to solve that problem is to have the judge read back the jury instructions. Literally nothing wrong with this whatsoever, okay? Now, as for these 4 pieces of testimony, this is an interesting thing. And I have to remind everyone here, because I just feel like this cannot be said loudly enough or often enough, that no one knows what's going on in the jury room. No one, literally no one has any idea what is happening inside that jury room. It's entirely confidential, okay? So everything that is being discussed here and read into the requests for these testimony is rank speculation, okay? That's it. There was some random person on Threads this morning who said, I think it's because there's one holdout and they're trying to convince this person. Nobody knows, right? Can I just make that really clear? Nobody knows. I'm just going to make a couple of observations, though, about the evidence that they have asked to be read back, because they asked for some very specific evidence that the prosecution had directed the jury to focus on in the final moments of their closing argument. Okay. And they did something very interesting here about the two different pieces of testimony that they asked for, which is significant. Okay. So they asked for 3 pieces of testimony to be read back from David Pecker. One about the conversation that he had with Trump about how the National Enquirer could help the campaign. Then testimony about what was said about follow-up with Michael Cohen. And then testimony about a meeting in Trump Tower between David Pecker, Michael Cohen, and Donald Trump, which was the moment that the entire election interference conspiracy came to be. All right. Then they asked for testimony from Michael Cohen about the same meeting. Now, I'm going to remind you all of something about the way this testimony came in the trial. David Pecker was the very first witness for the prosecution. Michael Cohen was the very last witness for the prosecution. So the jury literally had like 4.5 weeks between the testimony of these two individuals. But this morning, they shrunk that down to about a minute. And what it allowed the jury to do was to see the consistency between David Pecker's testimony about the start of the election interference conspiracy and what its purpose was for, and Michael Cohen's testimony that stated the exact same thing. Now, why does this matter? Okay. So I have been telling you all from the very beginning of this trial that I thought it was an incredibly smart decision to start with David Pecker. Why? Because David Pecker knows where all the bodies are buried. He is the guy who was in bed in this conspiracy from the very beginning of it. And he still considers himself to be a friend of Donald Trump. However, the testimony that he gave on behalf of the prosecution was profoundly damning, because what it essentially did was set up the entire case, the underlying conspiracy that led to the payoff to Stormy Daniels, that led to Michael Cohen using his home equity loan to pay Stormy Daniels, that led to Donald Trump then paying back Michael Cohen through these checks and invoices and ledger entries that are fraudulent business records. Okay. So the whole thing starts with the testimony of David Pecker about this meeting in Trump Tower and Michael Cohen's confirming testimony about it as well. Now, what's really interesting about this is that there are jury instructions about how you're supposed to take the testimony of co-conspirators. All right. And also what's really interesting about it is that even if you didn't believe Michael Cohen or you thought Michael Cohen had credibility problems, David Pecker doesn't have those same issues. And if his testimony is the same as Michael Cohen's testimony about the origin of this conspiracy, that's the whole shebang right there. So I will just say this. I would not be feeling terribly confident about this if I was the defense counsel, because what it shows is not only that this jury is being diligent enough to have the instructions read back to them, but it also shows that they are doing what the prosecution asked in closing argument and looking at the very origin of this conspiracy that leads to the generation of all of these fraudulent business records. And that, my friends, leads to a guilty verdict. Okay. They would not be looking at issues of like, how do we interpret the evidence? How are we allowed to consider what witnesses have said if they're interested witnesses? They would not be looking at the origins of an election interference conspiracy if they thought Donald Trump was not guilty. All right. And I say all of that with all the speculation that goes with this. Okay. But I want to make it really clear to everyone here. Okay. This is not something that you would expect a jury to do if they were going to acquit. All right. Now, I've said from the very beginning that I thought an acquittal was almost impossible here. And that is because in order to have an acquittal, you would have to have all 12 of the jurors essentially agree to acquit, not hang, but acquit. Okay. Because the jury's verdict has to be unanimous. Has to be unanimous. Now, let's get to something about that, by the way, that is blowing up far right-wing media right now, because there is a wild set of disinformation that is being circulated by Fox News and others about the instructions of the judge on how the jury reaches a verdict. And I want everyone here to be really clear on this, because there's no reason for anybody to be upset about this. This is literally something that the judge that has been like, the judge did absolutely right, and that has been ginned up into this whole conspiracy theory by the far right media ecosphere. Okay, so here's what the judge instructed the jury on. One, this is the most important thing. Their verdict has to be unanimous. Okay. There's no dispute about this. Nobody is saying that the verdict can be 444, which is what Fox News had in a chyron yesterday. No, the verdict has to be unanimous. If he is found guilty or not guilty, the verdict has to be unanimous. There's no mistaking it, okay? If he is found guilty on fraudulent business records in furtherance of a crime, that has to be ruled as guilty by the entire jury. All 12 jurors have to determine that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? So that's the first thing I want to say about this. But I want you to understand what the underlying issue is here that Fox News has now turned into this whole nonsense thing, okay? Here's the deal. What the judge instructed the jury was that in order to find him guilty of these felonies, they have to determine that the felonies were committed in furtherance of an underlying crime. And we've talked about this. There's three potential options for this: election interference in violation of New York law, tax fraud in violation of New York law, and other fraudulent business records being generated. Okay, those are the three options for the underlying crime. This is where Fox News is getting the 444 thing from. All right. So let me just explain to you how this works. What the jury was instructed upon by the judge was that while their verdict on guilt or innocence must be unanimous, they do not have to be unanimous on the underlying crime. However, they do have to be unanimous that the records were created in furtherance of an underlying crime. So this is what that means. Let's just say hypothetically there's 6 jurors who say, we believe he created these business records in furtherance of an election conspiracy. And the other 6 jurors say, we believe he created these business records in furtherance of a tax fraud. He's still guilty. He's still guilty. And that's a unanimous verdict. The only thing that is not unanimous is what the underlying crime was, but they don't have to be unanimous on that because the requirements of the law are that he committed these fraudulent business records generation in furtherance of an underlying crime. Not the same underlying crime, but an underlying crime. Okay. And this is totally legal. There's nothing improper about this. There's nothing wrong about this. There's nothing about this that is like, off the wall. There's nothing about this that is an appealable issue. This is legit. Okay. This is an interpretation of the law that is dead on. Okay. And it has to be unanimous on every single count. All right. So I don't want anybody to be running around out here thinking that there is some kind of mass conspiracy going on with this judge. And I will just tell you all that from the place where, I sit on this, this is yet again another example of how Fox News is manipulating the facts and the truth in order to make sure that there is a basis for Trump's whole base to think that he's just a victim and that he's being martyred and that they don't have to believe the fact that he actually committed 34 separate felonies. All right. So that's what that issue is about. And I just, by the way, troll bell, sorry, I forgot to ding it. That, by the way, is one issue that I just want people to be really, really clear on, because I know that this has taken some attention away from some people, even in this audience, including on Patreon, where you're like, wait a minute, did the judge do something wrong? No, the judge did not do anything wrong. And this is literally just a means by which Fox News is trying to kind of turn this into something that it's not. All right. And you should not be surprised by that. This is one reason why I keep telling you all disinformation is going to be at an all-time high this week. And until we have a verdict, there is going to be, until we reach that point and beyond it, an enormous uptick in trolling, disinformation, bots, and of course, the far-right media ecosphere claiming that this whole thing is one big deep state conspiracy to keep Donald Trump from being reelected, which is insane. Okay, I just have to say it's insane. Even Fox News's own reporters yesterday took Alina Habba to task because she was claiming somehow this was like Joe Biden's weaponized DOJ. And I just have to remind everybody, the DOJ is not involved in this case. Joe Biden, not involved in any way in this case. This is Alvin Bragg, the district attorney for Manhattan. Okay. He's not under the oversight of the DOJ in any way, shape, or form. He is an elected official of the state of New York. All right. So again, you've got to be really, really cautious and careful about the news that you are seeing or that is being filtered to you by other people. And you should ask questions immediately if it sounds fishy, because I'm just going to say this. I know I rant on here all the time about how TV law dramas are not the way courts work. But let me just ask you a question. Okay, seriously, even just in reference to the things you may have seen on Law and Order and other places like that. Have you ever heard of a verdict being issued that is not unanimous? Like, it can happen in certain civil cases, but I'm not talking about like the random slip and fall where it's like, a totally different standard of liability. And it's like, a preponderance of the evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. Have you ever in your entire life seen an example of a conviction of someone's guilt that would take away their freedom that is not unanimous? No, you haven't. If you have, I don't know what you've been watching, but no, you have not. That's not the way any of this works. And so whenever you hear an allegation that just sounds fishy, you've got to ask questions, right? You've got to ask questions about why and where it's coming from and everything else, all right? We do not take away people's freedom in this country unless there is a jury of their peers that votes unanimously that they are guilty of a crime, all right? He's not going to be adjudicated guilty without a unanimous verdict on every single count, okay? So that's that. All right. Somebody asked a question about whether or not the gag order is still in operation. Yes, it is. And it will be in operation unless and until the judge rules otherwise. Some legal commentators are a little bit surprised that the defense has not asked for the gag order to be lifted. But I have to say at this point, given all of Trump's outbursts and how he's got all of his lackeys running around saying things that he can't say due to the gag order, I don't think Merchan would grant it anyhow. All right. And whether or not the gag order continues after a potential conviction is anybody's guess. I mean, if I were Judge Merchan, I would certainly extend the gag order until he's sentenced, at least, because I think it makes complete sense to have restrictions on threats to witnesses and attacks on the judge's family and Alvin Bragg's family and, the process of things. I just think it makes complete sense. Okay. We really do have to, hope here that, the gag order stays in place. And I think it should. I mean, I frankly don't think there's any risk that Merchan's going to lift it, but, there hasn't been a request for that at all. Okay. Okay, so I've covered that, and I'm crossing off my list. Let's talk about Alito's letter yesterday. So yesterday, in response to a letter that Senator Durbin and Senator Whitehouse sent to Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Alito replied. By the way, I'm just going to tell you that in and of itself is extremely unusual. All right. If he did it without Robert's permission, it's almost a defiance of the chain of command at the Supreme Court. He wrote a letter that was basically like, I don't really like flying flags, but my wife does. And, it's not really on me what my wife decides to hang on the flagpole of our primary home or our vacation home on Long Beach Island. And it was very dismissive, very dismissive. And honestly, not rude isn't even really the word. I mean, it was a statement from somebody who clearly thinks they're above any ethical reproach, meaning like they don't think anything bad is going to happen to them as a result of this. And so let me just say a couple of things about this. All right. Dick Durbin is not effectively doing his job right now. Dick Durbin at the moment is out there calling for some kind of mandatory code of ethics for the Supreme Court. But I'm just going to tell you all that has to be passed through legislation. And I don't see it happening. Okay. I personally think that the greater issue here right now, and I'm not alone in this either, should be for the Senate Judiciary Committee to hold immediate hearings, to call in Justice Alito, to call in his wife, to call in Clarence Thomas and Clarence Thomas's wife, and put them under oath and ask them questions about whether or not they believe that Joe Biden won the election. Because frankly, we have a lot of evidence at this point that they don't believe that they are full-blown insurrectionists. That's what the flags indicate. That's what Ginny Thomas's support of the insurrection indicates. And Alito and Thomas should have recused themselves from Trump versus U.S. at bare minimum, the immunity case that they're currently ruling on, that we're waiting a ruling on, and that's been pending for more than a month. And they should be recused from reviewing any case involving an insurrectionist conviction. Okay. Jamie Raskin wrote a great piece yesterday in the Washington Post. I encourage you to go watch it about how. Now, okay, this isn't as easy as it sounds, but how they could be forced to recuse. I do think that he makes a good point under constitutional law that recusal is not optional. And at the same time, I don't see this court doing anything to get Alito and Thomas to recuse in cases right now, unless there are hearings and there is such a serious mandatory outcry that Roberts kind of doesn't have any choice. But Roberts, in my opinion, and nobody knows what happens inside the Supreme Court. It's all very confidential and cloak and dagger and all this kind of stuff. But my perception at the moment is that Judge Roberts has lost control of the court. And that sucks because he is somebody who historically has been concerned about like the politicization of the Supreme Court. And there's nothing like this, right, that has ever happened in the history of the United States Supreme Court. There's, a Supreme Court justice flying an insurrectionist flag. Are you joking? Supreme Court justices taking massive bribes in the form of like $100,000 vacations and private plane flights and like fishing trips to Alaska with like far-right donors who have matters before the court. I mean, it's absolutely unprecedented. And the fact that we are still in a situation where literally nothing has been done about this is galling. It's truly galling. Now, I want to talk about something that Sherilyn Ifill said this morning. Former head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, incredible law professor. I mean, honestly, of all the legal commentators out there, and I said this morning on Threads, the opinion that I trust more than anybody's is Sherilyn Ifill's. She's a genius. And I put her like above Lawrence Tribe, to be honest. She's so smart. She said this morning that what she fears is that Alito's letter was an attempt to clear the air that completely failed in its intent because, like every other insurrectionist and far right-wing person, they don't understand the reality that 80% of us live in. She fears that this was an attempt to clear the air because what could be coming is a really bad decision on presidential immunity. And this comes on the back of Sotomayor giving a talk a couple of days ago, I believe in Boston, where she talked about the fact that some days at the court, she has to go into her chamber, shut the door, and cry. Which in and of itself is a very unusual statement for a Supreme Court justice. I saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg speak at my law school when I was, I don't know, like a 3L, I think my last year of law school. She also was the speaker at my law school graduation. And even the fact that she was speaking to our law school at the time was considered to be a little bit out of sorts because ordinarily Supreme Court justices don't do that. And, she talked about things like Roe versus Wade and other things at that speech, long time ago now. Like more than 25 years ago. But the fact that Sotomayor was this blunt and explicit raises some questions, right, about what's really going on at the court and whether or not these are signals of what's coming with regard to presidential immunity. Now, let me just remind you all of like what I have said about this. I have long held that they can't rule that there is absolute immunity for a president to begin with, because that would literally be the end of the Supreme Court. It would eviscerate the Supreme Court's own authority. And the one thing I will say about these kind of like, ideologues on the Supreme Court is they want their power, right? They want their power, and they want their power to do whatever they want. Okay. Removing that authority from the Supreme Court, not only does it end all checks and balances in our federal government, but it also essentially puts the Supreme Court in a position where they can never rule on what a president does. And that would mean that, like, if Joe Biden dropped a bomb on the Republican National Convention, or he rounded up every single, like, Republican in the House of Representatives and stuck them in Guantanamo Bay, the Supreme Court would never be able to do anything about it. So I don't see it going that far. But what I think is quite possible is that the 6 conservative justices could say there has to be a test, and it's got to be a very explicit, specific test about what falls within the purview of presidential conduct and what doesn't. And here's the test as it has to be applied. And this is a very long and in-depth and evidentiary process, and it's going to slow down Judge Chutkan's trial, right? That's quite possible. Another option is that they could say there's absolute immunity for Donald Trump, but we're not ruling that this holds for any other president. That would be a really scary decision, right? And I also don't think that that's necessarily one that could ever be rationalized, but you never know with these justices. And I have to say, there's another issue here, which is that even in the oral argument on absolute immunity, 2 of the conservative justices seemed really not on board with the argument that there would be absolute immunity for a president in all circumstances. So again, we will have to see how this plays out. But it could be a signal or it could not be. All I will say about this is that, Sherilyn Ifill is rarely wrong. And this is an instance in which I hope she is. Because the end of presidential immunity in this country would in essence be the end of the republic. Meaning that if a president has immunity for crimes committed while in office that are outside the purview of the scope of presidential authority, then a president can do whatever they want. And that, by the way, means that if, God forbid, and this isn't going to happen, but if, God forbid, President Trump was reelected, all bets are off. Like, there's literally no barriers to him doing whatever he wants. So I do want people to be very, very thoughtful about this and not panic because we don't have a decision yet, right? My bet has always been that there was going to be some kind of limiting test on absolute immunity, but that also, depending on how it comes down, might not limit the timetable for Judge Chutkan's trial. All right. That's the other thing, is that if it's an evidentiary hearing and she can get it done in a few days, that could mean we could still have a trial in her courtroom before November. So all of this is dependent on what the Supreme Court does. And I just want everyone to understand, though, that the signals that are coming out of the Supreme Court right now are not great. And, you all know me. I'm here to be a realist. I really abhor outrage farming, and I'm not outrage farming today. I want to make that very, very clear because we don't know what's going to happen yet. And my belief, the longtime viewers know this, my belief is that like any antidote to panic or fear is action. So like get involved. If you're freaked out about it, go do a volunteer shift, a phone bank or text bank for a candidate you like, go write some postcards to voters. But, frankly, there are some signs here that are not ideal. And I always promise you guys that I'm going to tell you when there are things that I'm a little worried about. I'm a little worried about that. All right. And I'm just going to be honest about it. Don't panic. We won't know. It's not terrifying because nothing has happened yet. Please don't freak out. But just understand that there are some signals that are not ideal. And we will know what the decision is when we know what it is. Okay. That's it. And, frankly, I think that things have to be dealt with regard to Alito and Thomas in very different ways. The other thing I'm going to remind you all of, because I think this is a really good point. We are not powerless on this. Please don't ever make a comment like that on my feed again. Because the thing about American democracy is that we are never powerless, right? Like, there are hundreds of millions of voting age people in this country. The whole point of democracy is that it's power to the people. Nobody's ever powerless in this democracy, right? So this brings me to the point that I was just about to make, which is this, okay? You want these two yahoos off the court, or you want the Supreme Court expanded? We have to win in undeniable numbers in November. We have to reelect Joe Biden. We have to expand our lead in the Senate, and we have to take back the House. That's how it gets done. And we need a majority in the Senate that is committed to ending the filibuster using the nuclear option. Because let me just say this. You use the nuclear option on the filibuster to expand the Supreme Court, all this is fixed. Okay. And we do have candidates running right now who have said that they are in favor of overturning the filibuster on key issues. Debbie Murcassel-Powell, who's running against Rick Scott in Florida, is committed to it, particularly for ensconcing Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. Ruben Gallego has said that he's in favor of it. Once we have Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin out of the picture, and we have a majority big enough in the Senate to tank the filibuster on certain issues. Reminder, there's precedent for this. This is how Mitch McConnell got the filibuster ended so he could pack the federal judiciary with far right-wing judges without having anybody be able to filibuster it. Okay? Like, there is a means to do this, and the means is actually at the ballot box. So if you need another reason to get organized and get out there and get involved, like, this is it. Because we're not powerless. Like, I mean, again, I just have to remind you all, it's a participatory democracy. The only way that it fails is if you don't participate. And I have said over and over and over again here that, like, voting this year is not enough. It's not enough. You can't just be out there and saying to everybody, like, vote blue. That's not enough. Okay? Sitting behind a screen and typing vote blue, blue wave into your computer. Not enough. Not enough. Okay. You've got to actually get involved in canvassing your neighbors and working for campaigns and making sure that, like, the people that you talk to on a regular basis are being deep canvassed about why they need to get involved. Your target for this are disenfranchised, disaffected, disengaged voters. You don't have to commit to, like, flipping Trumpers. That's not a good that's not a good use of your time. It's in fact a waste of your time. Your efforts should be directed to the people that you know in your area who may not understand why this election matters so much because they're checked out, they're not paying attention, they have all sorts of other reasons why they might not want to be involved in this. Those are the people that you need to actually get to, all right? And the only way to do that is to actually get trained in deep canvassing and to start doing the hard work that is always volunteer-based in this country of making sure that the right candidates get elected, all right? Like, it's incredibly important, just incredibly important to do this work, okay? So important. All right, that's it for now. I'm going to remind you all, because I got to ask this question, that I am fully out of pocket and offline today. I'm going to give you guys the exact time slot so nobody panics, all right? I am offline entirely today between 11:15 a.m. Pacific, that's 2:15 p.m. Eastern, and about 12:30-ish my time, so 3:30-ish East Coast time. If there is a verdict in that window, I will be back as soon as possible. And there will be a second broadcast this afternoon. All right. And if there's any other emergency that we need to address here, there will also be a second broadcast for that. Okay. Just understand this though, like whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Okay. And I will be here to give you immediate commentary and hopefully celebrate with you, because I do think there's going to be a guilty verdict, and we will move on from there. All right. So that's it, my friends. I will catch you later on today. Perhaps I would not be surprised to see a verdict later on today, frankly, especially given the testimony that's just been read back. And if it's tomorrow, even better. I said this morning on Threads, it would bring a whole new meaning to Friday in Trump land for our longtime viewers. You all know that has been a theme going all the way back to 2015 here. And I will catch you all one way or another online or here later in the day or tomorrow morning, regular time. If you have not yet hit the thumbs up here, please do so. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you want early notice of an upcoming bonus broadcast, you need to become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/ResistanceLive. Subscription started as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. And you get to attend Progressive Coffee Hour on Sundays, which is really fun. And also you can join here on the channel as a member. You can click join right below here. And that will also give you an opportunity to support this broadcast with your spare change and to get like emojis and stars and all sorts of things next to your comments. So however you do it, if this broadcast is meaningful to you, please consider supporting it financially. This is work, right? This is like a big chunk of my job these days, and I have a team to pay behind me and 2 little kids to feed. So much love to all of you, and I will catch you all here sometime soon. All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Okay, bye.